lesson and hopefully offer some practical ways in which to live this out. I'm Shawna Boren, and I am joined by Dan Kent and Osheta Moore, and we are so excited to be here with you today. How are you guys feeling this lovely rainy afternoon here in the Twin Cities?
Sleepy.
Yeah.
Yep, sleepy.
Yep.
Sleepy, indeed.
You know, when we're quarantined, we're stuck in the house and we can't go outside. It just stacks on, you know?
Yeah, it's just, makes it a little bit harder to do.
You eat and cook all the stick to your, rib stuff.
Yeah.
That's the sleepy. So yeah.
When quarantine started, I've been joking, but it's so true that I was really committed to carbo loading during this time.
Of course.
Gonna keep doing it. Well, this past Sunday, we got to hear from Dan Kent. He gave us the sermon at Woodland Hills. And Dan, thank you so much for sharing. It was really sweet. And I was really moved by your vulnerability and your honesty and just revealing a little bit about yourself and situation with your mom. That was just really powerful to me. And then you shared also from the book of Ruth, which I love, those verses where Ruth is pledging herself to Naomi, when she's saying, don't urge me to leave you. Your people are going to be my people. Where you go, I'm going to go. And your God's going to be my God. And where you die, I'm going to die. It's such a beautiful pledge of covenant and relationship and friendship. I just really love that you talked about that. And it really challenged me to look at relationships in my life to see where I can be more faithful if God's calling me to do that. And then the other thing that you brought up that I really stuck with me was this whole idea of redemption that Naomi got to experience. And what struck me was that God, in his infinite love for us, which that is a theme I feel like on the MuseCast, right? We keep talking about that. God, in his infinite love for us, he will and can do anything to bring about our restoration, to bring about our redemption. And I think that's so cool, the way in which he used a woman of a different race to bring happiness and joy and redemption back to Naomi. So I really enjoyed your sermon. Thank you so much for sharing it. Yeah. For those who maybe haven't watched it yet, or they need a refresher, Dan, can you summarize what you said to us?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for those kind of words. I mean, Ruth is such a great story. If you're going to do a sermon and you make it on the book of Ruth, it's going to be a good sermon because the story's so good, So even if what you have to say isn't all that insightful, the story will carry the sermon. So that's very nice. But, I've just been thinking about Ruth so much lately. In particular, it just baffles me that you have such a profound act of loyalty and such great faithfulness in someone who is not even an Israelite during this very terrible situation in the time of Judges, which is just this horrible time in Israel's history. And that was just very inspiring for me. And it kept coming back into my mind. And so I said, okay, fine. I need to read this. I need to put together a message on it. And as I was putting the message together, I was looking at faithfulness. I was really impressed at how Ruth's faithfulness kind of laid the groundwork for this unity between Ruth and Naomi. And then that drew Boaz in, and just how faithfulness is sort of like this fuel, this initial kind of what you might even say like the plutonium in the transmogrifier, if you've watched Back to the Future. That's a stretch. Can we rewind this? Let me go back and take that.
No, that's on Netflix now, so you're good.
Oh, okay, good. But I'm impressed at how faithfulness leads to solidarity, and I thought that was a great lesson out of Ruth, and maybe that's part of what has been tapping on my heart the last few weeks. I don't know, but the other thing too, like you said, Shawna, I grew up with a young single mom who was so dedicated to raising me, and growing up with that strong female presence in my life and seeing that in Ruth, it just, it really touches my heart on a personal level as well. So, and Osheta, you were there this weekend.
Yeah.
We live streamed it, but we did our first Q&A together with Paul Eddy. And what were your thoughts on the Ruth message? What did you take away from it?
I thought it was a great message. I had not heard somebody teach that when Jesus says, "Be perfect as my Father is perfect," or "Be perfect, therefore I am perfect," like that it was all connected to how we treat each other, and so that perfection is not like an internal holiness or an internal like perfecting of our spiritual formation on our own, like many contemplatives might kind of lean into, but like how we treat each other and how we allow the love of God to spread from one person to another, and how we show faithfulness to each other is that perfection that Jesus is asking us. And so it just was so in line with like what we know of God as a relational God. And so of course God would say, the perfection I have is a relational perfection, so I want you to achieve that and to live into that. So yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, I think I agree with that, Osheta. And I think there was a part where, Dan, you said our faithfulness to one another is a way in which we image God. Mm-hmm. And that was just a really, again, like a wow and an aha. And I better dive into that a little bit personally. So yeah, it was really
that's copyright Paul Eddy, by the way.
Got it.
Paul says, like, if I have what is it? Not wisdom, but I'm clanging cymbals. But if I have not love, it's all jumbled in my mind. But like, it's this idea that like we can do all these like great spiritual practices, but if we don't have love for each other, it's a mess. It's just noise. And so,
and it's hard to be committed and faithful if you're not loving, right? That's like right. If you don't have love for someone or a situation or a place, it will be difficult to be faithful.
Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting too that Jesus often challenged the Pharisees, who were obsessed with personal holiness, and yet they were the opposite of what we're supposed to be. And I think that Matthew 5:48, how that's connected with the rest of chapter 5 it just kind of shows, no, you're going down the wrong path here. And so I love it.
Yeah. Well, during this part of the MuseCast, we like to tackle some questions. And for those of you who maybe don't know or aren't aware or have forgotten, we have been having live Q&A every weekend with our live stream sermons, and it's been really cool. So many questions come in though, so we can't get to them all. And so we like to save a few for the MuseCast. And so we have a few that we want to tackle. You guys ready?
Sure.
Ready?
You got this. It'll be good.
Wait, hold on. Let me stretch a little bit.
Yeah, gotta stretch it out.
Put our caps on. Let's do
it. Don't want to pull anything. All right. So one of the questions that we didn't get to, what I thought was really interesting, especially dealing with our current situation with everyone pretty much being in some sort of lockdown because of the coronavirus, COVID-19. And this person was just saying that they're having a real struggle with their family who wants to continue to get together for gatherings and be with one another. But this person is feeling like, I don't want to do anything that would harm those who are vulnerable. And so I'm saying she, I don't know why, because I don't know if it was a woman or a man. So this person was just saying, what is the right choice to make? Do I forsake my personal relationships and get together with my family that I love? Or do I, take care of those who maybe are more vulnerable and stay in?
Osheta, you got something, or what do you think? You want me to start, or would you like to start this one?
Well, I think so. Whenever I get a question like this, it gets me kind of excited because I think we've all been so conditioned to like either or thinking.
Yeah.
My first response would be, well, could you invite your family to help you dream up or get creative about ways that we can stay connected? That's not face-to-face, because it feels to me from the way that I read this question, this person does have a core conviction that she wants to be loving by practicing social distancing. And so what I would say, and I think what I would say is, hey, I this really matters to me, but you really matter to me too.
Mm-hmm.
And I know for you, us getting together face to face feels like the best way for us to continue building our relationship. But let's dream together. Like, I'm going to let you in on my thinking. This is what I'm passionate about. Let's figure out a way that we both feel good about, at least for a little bit, like a time being. And I think that creative, generative energy that might come from you just being honest to your family and friends and saying, this is what I'm passionate about, and this is what I want to do, but I want to invite you in to think of some ways so that we can come together. That might actually be a blessing to them, because they may be stuck in kind of an either or thinking. So that would be my first, is just invite them in and say, this is important to me. Let's figure it out together.
Yeah. Yeah. And obviously, I think many families and friends are dealing with this. You know, you've got elderly family members or people that we care about that are in assisted living homes and stuff, and they're unable to have visitors. And so it's difficult. And I can understand the angst that's felt of wanting to show your love to your family and those that you care about, but also wanting to protect the greater community. And so I love that you are suggesting an alternative way versus, yes, let's get together, or no, let's not. Thank you for that. Yeah.
I think what I like about your answer, Osheta, is that that first step of because if you might think that it's crazy to get together during a pandemic, and your family member might think that it's crazy not to, we're family. And just that first step of saying, okay, what's going on in your head that you think it's okay for us to get together? And then I'll let you in on what's going on in my head, why I think it's not okay. And I think that that's a step that we're more likely to have that step amongst family members. But I wish we could also have that in general society. Unfortunately, we're kind of losing that in the general society, and people are just charging forward with what they want. But so that's what I like about that answer, and I don't really have anything to add to that, because I think that's I would do that.
Well, speaking of charging forward to what you want, you know,
nice transition.
You know, at Woodland, we are kingdom focused. I feel like that's a lot of our teaching. And I know that, we have a different mindset than not everyone, but from some, in regards to politics and government. And that's not something we don't really try to mesh the two. But we do get questions about, you know, being a Jesus follower, and how much do you follow government leaders, and how much do you follow scripture? And so during this time, there is a lot of divisiveness, right? And so I think that's part of what we were talking about even last week with One Humanity and looking at humanity through the eyes of Jesus. But for those who are saying, it's hard for me to continue to have relationship with other brothers and sisters who are just blindly following government, when I feel like we should be following scripture, and vice versa. So it's depending on where you are with that, you could be looking at it from a couple of different directions. But what would you guys say to these questions?
Man, well, first of all, you know, government isn't the only authority that we have in our world here. We also have legal authority, we have medical authority, and we've got government authority. And in this case, you know, if we're talking about the pandemic, if this questioner is, I think that you have to distinguish which authority are we talking about. If it's something it's a medical danger, I'm going to lean toward the medical authorities away from even the Bible and, you know, the government. And that's how I'm inclined to do it. I think that, you know, when I was talking about solidarity, because I guess what I'm saying is that, and maybe this wasn't directed about the quarantine and about the coronavirus, but that's still on my mind.
I kind of think it was, though, just reading the way that they put it. Yeah.
Because I can really understand why people distrust the coronavirus recommendations, and that kind of paranoia, the doubt about the prescription that the government has had about, you know, staying at home and stuff like that. There's a lot of doubt about whether or not that's worth the risk, whether it's actually helping, or I mean, I get that, but at the same time, you know, in my individualistic inclinations is to just, you know, go with my own intuition and my own feeling. And if I did that, I'd be like, you know, forget the quarantine. I'm just going to go out there and I'll build antibodies. But, you know, as I'm trying to grow out of my own individualism, I'm trying to say, okay, what does it look like to trust other people in my community and to trust their expertise? I'm the type of guy, you know, I wanted to build this website in 2012, and I went and got an estimate of how much it would cost to have somebody build it. And it was like $15,000. And I said, forget that. I'm going to do it myself. And so I spent 14 months learning this programming language just to build this website, which is just absolutely stupid. But that's how individualistic do-it-yourself I am.
Right.
It's like, it's pathological, you know, and growing out of that pathological individualism, part of that means, okay, I don't really understand all of the issues at play here, but it seems like most people who have gotten MDs in the important topic here, which is, you know, medicine, you know, biological health, biological pandemics, they all seem to suggest that, you know, staying at home and staying apart is going to help. And so I even though I don't understand it, it doesn't seem to make sense to me. This is what solidarity means, is trusting other people when they've done so much work to learn so much about these very topics. Yeah. And so for me, part of godly living is to grow into solidarity, which sometimes means trusting in somebody who I don't think that they're right, but I have to trust their expertise. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think it's difficult, but I want to tap into something because in the sermon you talked about faithfulness and solidarity. And I like that you brought up that we have a variety of different types of leaders that we encounter in our life. And beforehand, we were kind of discussing some options for some of these questions. And Osheta, you kind of like heard a certain word that the questioner was asking when they said blindly follow. Do you remember that? I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit of what you were thinking about that, because I do think there is a difference in having solidarity and faithfulness and blindly following whomever is in leadership in your life.
Right. Yeah. So the person that sent the question in said that they have a hard time with Christians who can embrace everything our current government is doing and then using blindly again towards the end. And I am like 100% honest. I have a hard time with people who will trust everything and blindly follow too. Like, I'm just skeptical enough to be like, really? But also because I've committed to living my life the Jesus way and being a kingdom person, that then I have decided that I'm not going to blindly follow any government authority, especially if things that they're saying violates the image of God and other people, or if the suggestions or the things that they're doing violates my core conviction to be loving. So I think that there is a part of us as kingdom people that we have to be okay with, is saying that government and authority figures can only do so much. They can only give so much insight, and they can only say so much. But as kingdom people, it's our job to kind of fill in those gaps. So it'll sometimes not look like we're following orders for the sake of love, and we saw that in the life of Jesus actively challenging social mores and breaking laws in order to love the people who are being broken or oppressed by those laws and those rules. And so I think that there's a part of us, a weird, quirky part of us, that just has to be okay with that blindly following. Like, we're not ever going to blindly follow any kind of government authority. But there's one part of that question that I kind of want to hang out on just a little bit, because I think it's important for us to recognize that we are going to disagree with other Christians. No two Christians are going to completely be in alignment on all issues. And part of that is because we're all in our different places in our journey, in our faith.
Are you going us versus them?
Yeah, the us versus
That's it. Go there. Do it.
I think it's super. I think what we need to be more so than deciding what we're going to follow or what rules we're going to like, more so being kind of on guard for that. I think we need to be really on guard for the scaffolding that we might be building for that us and them. Like, I'm a right kind of Christian because I'm doing these things, or I'm believing these things, and they're a wrong kind of Christian. And what I think we need to do is we need to kind of break down that scaffolding by saying they have a whole life of experiences and background and work that they've done that have got them to this place where they maybe affirm our current government. And I have to respect that that's where they're bringing something to the table that I'm not. And so if you really want to have a conversation and win a brother or sister over, the very worst thing you can do is to try to build yourself up as the moral authority or the better Christian. Yeah. So if you have some deep concerns about some of the things that they're saying or doing, there is a peacemaking, gentle, winsome way to invite them into a conversation, because the goal isn't to be right, it's to be in right relationship, which is what Dan taught us about faithfulness, that we reflect God when we are faithfully loving each other.
Yeah.
So I really think it's super important that we don't allow that foothold of the enemy when we start talking about these things.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Can I? We're so lucky to have the leadership that we've had in Woodland Hills, and I'm just thinking about the Q&A this weekend, Osheta, when Paul Eddy was basically sharing a different perspective than what Greg Boyd holds on what God knows about the future, and that's an issue that has separated so many Christians. But the fact that those two guys can be in the same church and pursue God together and love one another, even though they have opposite views on this really hot issue in theology, I think is such a great model of exactly what you're talking about. And I just always feel so fortunate when I see that modeled with those guys, especially. So
yeah, that was so new for me. The fact that we could be brothers and sisters, the three of us, just take for an example, and we could disagree on something that each of us maybe hold as valuable, but we could still love and care for one another and believe the best about one another. That, like, I had never experienced that really before. That wasn't ever really taught to me before, that is okay to question and to not always agree, but still act in love toward one another is the important thing. So that's part of that solidarity piece.
Yeah, what I've noticed in Paul and Greg is that they don't agree to disagree. They agree to be curious.
Yeah.
So, and I think that even changing our posture from that way of like, we're not going to disagree to disagree, and it's just not something, but like we're going to agree to be curious. Tell me more. How did that happen? You know?
Yeah, because agree to disagree, right? It's kind of like, okay, it's done. Agree to disagree, and that kind of puts up a little bit of a wall there. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. All right, I think we've got time for one more.
Yeah.
Cool.
Does that work? Okay. We in talking about loving others and being in solidarity and being faithful to others, we had someone write in who said that by nature they are very giving and others oriented, but in their life they have also been hurt and damaged by people taking advantage of that. And this person really had to allow Jesus to come in and heal that that brokenness and that hurt and pain. And so they're wondering now, like, they want to continue to be others oriented. They want to sacrifice for others, but is there a balance between sacrificing too much of themselves to the point of maybe even harming their health and well-being? Is as a believer, can they have a balance and say, I want to give and serve others, but I also need to take care of myself?
Dan?
Yeah, I'll start. I think there's a lot there. I think that one thing I would say is that when you're reading the teaching of God in the scripture, and the teaching of God says that we should, sacrifice for one another and to love one another, there you might be tempted to think, well, this is like some secret path to personal peace and personal security, and it's not necessarily that. I mean, it's there's no guarantees that you're gonna, find that life is going to be easy if you live this way. In fact, you see Jesus the story of Judas is a good example. I mean, even Jesus was betrayed by one of his 12, and he performed these miracles and he did so many loving things, and yet he still got burned. He still got hurt. But that doesn't invalidate the importance and the power of love. Just because people take advantage of it, the love is still, I think, very important. But I think absolutely part of loving each other as yourself is loving yourself too. And you have to protect yourself, and also loving the other person. If they're taking advantage of people, if they're hurting people, part of loving them is to not let them do that and to challenge them on that. So those are the first things that came to my mind in response. How about you two?
Yeah, I have always been challenged in let's just say my adult Christian life to be loving to others, and sometimes that means that you may brush up against one another and you have some conflict that you need to work through. But what I have learned in the last several years is that doesn't mean that I shrink back and that I wilt away and I quit loving and serving. Even if I feel like that person is taking advantage, what love in that moment looks like is saying, hey, this is what your action is making, it's how it's making me feel. This is how I'm experiencing what you're saying or doing. And can we talk through that? I think that's loving. And that's not something that's come naturally for me. If you think of fighting or flighting, it's either like have a confrontation or, just say peace out. And I think there's an alternative way. And for me, what I've learned is that a loving thing is to confront and just to say, hey, this is what is going on from my perspective. This is how I'm feeling because a result of this. Can we talk about it?
Yeah. I think the other thing I would add to this question is what I have found in my past when I've made a commitment to model sacrificial love or sacrificially love somebody. There's two things that have exacerbated my sense of being burnt or hurt from it. The first one is if I made that decision out of a place of like my own self gratitude or self congratulation, like if I did it solely because I wanted the accolades or I wanted the response, like the person, like the response from the act of love was more important to me than actually like being loving. And so then when that person didn't respond the way I wanted them to, I was really, really crushed. Mm-hmm. And so I had to do some work on being like really self-aware, like, am I doing this for the right reason? And am I doing this open-handed? Yeah. And when I've learned to do things out of love from an open-handed place, if they did hurt me or they didn't respond the way I wanted to, I was disappointed, but I wasn't in despair. I wasn't overly discouraged. And then the other thing is I think that because of individualism and the way that we think about our own personal holiness, we take this concept of loving others and we make it our own like personal thing that we do on our own, and we don't talk to anybody about it, and we don't invite any kind of counsel, or we don't even let other people know what we're doing. We just forge ahead and do things on our own. And what I learned when TC and I did urban ministry in New Orleans like over 20 years ago was that it's really important to have a community of people where you're processing like, here's my strategy for caring for homeless people. Here's my strategy for caring for gang members. Here's my like to talk to people, like, here's my personal process and this is what I'm doing. Does this make sense? Does this feel right? Does this feel safe? So I think even like having accountability or having people in your life to speak into that might prevent you from overextending yourselves and yourself in ways that then will cause you to be hurt later on.
Yeah. And I think too, if you have that accountability, if you have that community that you've discussed it with, they can help you to see if you are being taken advantage of, or if you are just, going too far in what you're doing and not being healthy. So we have like literally just like a minute or two left. That's, again, time flies when you're having fun, right? Dan, you had something practical that you thought would be helpful, and I agree. So I think today we're going to go with one practical application, and
that's good.
Dan, you're the man.
All right, sounds good. First of all, let me say really quick, this is probably the closest I'll ever come to being on a panel of experts, and it's kind of fun. So But I did this sermon on Ruth, and since Ruth is about the key players, the protagonist is a woman, and the key players, 2 of them are women, and then there's the one guy. I thought it's particularly prudent, being a guy myself, that maybe I should get some help from some female scholars on this story to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And one resource that I've come back to over and over and over again is the Woman's Bible Commentary. And this is from like the 1990s. The newer one looks different than this. But I tell you what, every time I've done a sermon where I've used this, I always see things that I just did not see in the text. And it also helps me be aware of the things that I need to be careful about. Sometimes I charge through and I'm kind of dumb and I say the wrong thing anyway, but this probably prevents half of my stupidity. And so if you're a guy and you're doing a sermon, even if it's not about women, because they go through every book here, and I've just been really impressed. Like the part on Leviticus was amazing, all the stuff that they saw that I just didn't even see. And so that's my practical advice for people who are either doing sermons, and if you're a guy, or if you're a guy or a girl doing just Bible study, this is really, really helpful. And it's been, I can't believe I spent like $20 on it. I've probably got, I don't know how to measure how much value I've gotten out of it, but I've used it so much. So highly recommend.
That's great. Well, thank you all for joining us. We hope you'll come back next week. Remember, if you have questions, you can email them to us at musecast@whchurch.org. We are really happy to be with you. We're really happy just to answer questions for you and just dialogue a little bit more about the sermon. So hopefully you guys will join us again. Thank you so much. Have a great Tuesday.
See ya.